The storm outside raged on, its relentless downpour hammering against the metal roof of the shelter. Inside, the staff hurried to wrap up their tasks, their exhaustion palpable after a grueling week at Cedar Haven Animal Rescue. The air was heavy with a quiet fatigue. Almost every cage was occupied, each housing a dog with a unique story of abandonment, loss, or neglect. In a dimly lit corner, separated from the others, lay a German shepherd named Duke. His once proud black and tan coat was now dull, marred by patches of missing fur along his back and legs. His ribcage protruded beneath his thin skin, and his eyes, which had once sparkled with vitality, were now dim and clouded, weighed down by months of illness and repeated rejection. Duke had been at the shelter longer than any of the others. Family after family walked by his cage, their eyes full of hope as they searched for their ideal companion. Duke would lift his head slowly, his heart briefly sparking with hope. But they never stopped. They wanted lively, healthy dogs, ones that were playful and full of energy. Duke was none of those things. "Poor boy," murmured Emma, one of the shelter workers, as she knelt to refill Duke's water bowl. Her voice was laced with sorrow. "You don't have much time left, do you?" she whispered, her heart breaking as she watched him. Duke had been battling an illness that gradually sapped his strength. The shelter had done everything they could, but without a family to care for him, his future looked grim. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through as the door creaked open. A woman entered, her raincoat dripping, holding the hand of a small child. Her face, though lined with fatigue, radiated kindness. Beside her, a little girl, no older than 3, bounced with excitement. Her tiny rain boots splashed in the puddles as her golden curls framed a face brimming with curiosity and wonder. "Come on, Lisa," the woman said softly, guiding her daughter further inside. "Let's see if we can find a doggy who needs a home." Lisa's wide, curious eyes darted from one kennel to the next, her excitement growing with every bark and wagging tail. Tugging at her mother's hand, she paused in front of a golden retriever whose tail pounded eagerly against the kennel bars. "Mommy, look!" she squealed, pointing excitedly. But her mother shook her head gently. "Let's keep looking, sweetheart. We need to find the right one," she said, her tone patient. As they continued down the row, Lisa's gaze wandered to the shadowy corner of the shelter. There, Duke lay quietly, his head resting on his paws. His tired eyes flickered as Lisa approached. Unlike the other dogs, he made no sound, too weak to bark, too drained to wag his tail. "Mommy, that one?" Lisa whispered, her voice full of concern. She tugged insistently on her mother's hand, pulling her closer to Duke's cage. Her mother hesitated, her eyes scanning the frail, sickly dog. His labored breaths and gaunt frame made it clear that Duke was not the kind of dog people typically adopted. Most would pass him by without a second thought. But not Lisa. She crouched by the kennel bars, her tiny face just inches from Duke's. Slowly, the German shepherd lifted his head, their eyes meeting. In that still moment, an unspoken connection passed between them. Something deep, something pure. "Mommy," he said, Lisa said softly, her voice filled with the innocent compassion only a child could possess. She reached her small hand through the bars, her fingertips brushing against Duke's nose. "Lisa, sweetheart, this dog isn't well. He's very sick," her mother said gently, crouching beside her. "We should find a healthier one." But Lisa didn't move. "He's lonely," she insisted, her eyes never leaving Duke's. "He needs us." Her mother sighed, unsure how to explain to her young daughter that Duke's time was running out. The shelter had done all it could, but without a family, he wouldn't last much longer. She was about to lead Lisa away when Emma, the shelter worker, approached them. "That's Duke," Emma said softly. "His name is Duke." Claire, the shelter worker, said softly. "He's been with us for quite some time now. He's sick. Nobody's been willing to take him because of his condition." Rebecca, the young mother, nodded, her eyes reflecting an understanding sadness. But little Lisa wasn't deterred. Her determination shone through her hopeful eyes as she clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Can we see him, Mommy? Please?" she begged, her voice carrying a quiet but powerful plea. Rebecca hesitated, glancing at Claire, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. "He's gentle," Claire added. "Even though he's not in the best shape, he's one of the sweetest dogs here." After a moment's pause, Rebecca sighed and relented. "All right, but just for a minute." Claire carefully unlocked Duke's kennel and slowly opened the door. Unlike the other dogs, Duke didn't bound out with excitement. Instead, he rose cautiously, his legs trembling beneath his frail body as he made his way toward the open door. His gaze lifted to meet Lisa's, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that words could hardly capture. Something raw, almost like gratitude. Lisa giggled softly as she reached out, her tiny hand gently resting on Duke's head. The old dog remained perfectly still, leaning into her touch, his eyes slowly closing as though savoring this rare, tender moment of affection. "He's beautiful," Lisa whispered, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Rebecca stood watching, her breath catching as she observed this incredible interaction. Duke, the dog no one wanted, leaned into her daughter's gentle embrace, his body visibly relaxing for the first time in months. It was as if Lisa could see past the fragile exterior to the loyal, loving soul beneath. "Mommy," Lisa said, her tone suddenly resolute, "we have to take him home. He's our dog." Rebecca's heart ached. She had come to the shelter intending to adopt a younger, healthier dog, one who could grow up alongside Lisa and wouldn't require constant care. Yet, standing here, seeing the connection between her daughter and Duke, she knew she couldn't refuse. "Honey, Duke might not be with us for very long," she said gently, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's very sick." Lisa nodded solemnly, her eyes wise beyond her years. "I know, Mommy, but he needs us now." Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes as she realized her daughter was right. Love isn't measured by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it's shared. She knelt beside Lisa, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, we'll take him home." Lisa's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around Duke's neck, as if they had always belonged together. Duke's tail, which had been still for so long, gave a slow, gentle wag. In the weeks that followed, their home was filled with moments of pure, unconditional love. Lisa devoted herself entirely to Duke, and under her care, the old shepherd seemed to find a new spark. His once dull eyes began to shimmer with life again, and though his body remained frail, his spirit grew stronger each day. Rebecca often found herself in awe of their bond. Lisa would sit for hours, reading her favorite stories to Duke or simply resting beside him. Despite his failing health, Duke seemed to thrive on the love he had finally found. One quiet evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Lisa curled up next to Duke, her tiny hand resting protectively on his head. She looked up at her mother, her voice filled with childlike hope. "Mommy, he's getting better, isn't he?" With the pure conviction of a child who believed that love could mend anything, Lisa looked up at her mother, her eyes shimmering with hope. Rebecca offered a tender, yet sorrowful smile. "He's doing his best, sweetheart," she said softly. But Lisa was undeterred. "I know he's getting better," she replied confidently. "He just needed us." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Against all odds, Duke's condition began to stabilize. Though he would never regain full health, the love and care from Lisa and her family gave him something far more powerful than medicine ever could: hope. Duke, the dog who had been rejected time and time again, had finally found a home where he was cherished unconditionally, even as his days grew short. Then one morning, something extraordinary happened. As Rebecca prepared breakfast, the sound of barking echoed through the house. It was deep, resonant, and unmistakably Duke's. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It had been so long since they'd heard him bark. Rushing to the living room, she found Duke standing at the front door, his tail wagging, his eyes bright with a renewed vitality. From her spot on the couch, Lisa giggled. "He wants to go for a walk, Mommy," she exclaimed. Rebecca blinked in disbelief. Duke, who hadn't mustered the strength for a walk in months, now stood tall, his proud stance as if the weight of his illness had been momentarily lifted. That day, they ventured out together, spending hours in the park. Duke trotted alongside Lisa, his head held high. He looked like the dog he once was, strong, alert, and full of life. They walked, played, and enjoyed the crisp air until the setting sun painted the sky in warm hues of orange and pink. By the time they returned home, they were all pleasantly exhausted. That evening, as the house grew quiet, Duke curled up next to Lisa on the couch. His head rested in her lap, her tiny hands gently stroking his fur. His breathing slowed, deep and steady, as the warmth of the fireplace bathed them in a soft, golden glow. Rebecca stood quietly in the doorway, taking in the serene scene. Lisa had drifted off to sleep, her little fingers still resting protectively on Duke's coat. His large body was curled around her, his chest rising and falling in perfect harmony with hers. Though his eyes were tired, they held a profound sense of peace and contentment that hadn't been there before. In the months since they brought him home, Duke had transformed from a frail, despondent dog to a beloved member of their family. The unconditional love of a 3-year-old had done what no medicine could. Rebecca tiptoed across the room, careful not to wake them. She gently pulled a blanket over both Lisa and Duke, her hand brushing against his head. His fur, though still patchy in places, felt warmer now, vibrant with life. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. Duke had finally found his place, wrapped in love, just as he deserved. Going to a place where he won't be sick anymore. He'll be happy, and he'll always watch over you, just like he does now, Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Lisa sniffled, her small hand gently stroking Duke's fur as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't want him to go, Mommy, she murmured, her voice breaking. Rebecca wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. I know, sweetheart, she said softly, but Duke has been so brave. He stayed with us this long because he loves you. Sometimes, when someone loves us that much, they hold on even when it's hard. But it's okay to let them rest when they're tired. Lisa's eyes brimmed with understanding far beyond her years. She leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to Duke's head. I love you, Duke, she whispered. Duke's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and he looked up at Lisa with a deep, unwavering love. His tail, though weak, gave the slightest wag, as if he was saying goodbye. With a final, contented sigh, his eyes closed, and his breathing slowed until it stopped altogether. Rebecca's tears fell as she held her daughter close, both of them sitting in the quiet stillness of the room. The only sounds were the soft crackling of the fire and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Though their hearts ached with loss, there was a profound beauty in the moment. Duke had passed peacefully, surrounded by the love that had carried him through his final days. From a forgotten, sick dog in a shelter, he had become a cherished member of their family, his life transformed by the simple, yet powerful act of unconditional love. In the days that followed, Duke's presence lingered in their home. Lisa often talked about him, imagining him running free in a place where he could chase squirrels and play without pain. Each night, she would look up at the stars and whisper, "Good night, Duke," as though she knew he was watching over her. Rebecca found solace in the way her daughter grew stronger through the experience. Lisa had learned that love isn't measured by time but by the depth of connection. Even though Duke was gone, his memory remained a constant source of comfort and inspiration, a place where he won't be sick anymore. He'll be happy there, and he'll always watch over you, just like he is here, Hannah said softly, her voice trembling as she tried to comfort her daughter. Lila's tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She leaned down, gently pressing a kiss to Duke's head. I love you, Duke, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Duke's eyes flickered open for a brief moment. He looked up at Lila, his gaze filled with profound, unwavering love. His frail tail gave the faintest wag, as if to say goodbye. Then, with one final, peaceful sigh, His eyes closed, and his breathing slowed until it stopped completely. Hannah pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, their shared grief filling the quiet room. The only sounds were the soft crackling of the fire and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. It was a moment steeped in sorrow, yet somehow it was also profoundly beautiful. Duke had found peace, his final moments spent surrounded by the love that had carried him through his final months. From a dog who had been cast aside, left to wither in a shelter, Duke had become a cherished part of their family. And though he was now gone, his memory would forever remain etched in their hearts. In the weeks that followed, Lila spoke often of Duke. She would tell her mother stories, imagining Duke running joyfully through the fields of heaven, chasing squirrels and playing with other dogs. Each night, before bed, she would look up at the stars and wave. "Good night, Duke," she'd say softly, as if she knew he was still watching over her. Though the house was quieter without him, the love Duke had brought into their lives lingered. It became a source of strength for both Lila and Hannah. Hannah marveled at how her daughter seemed to grow from the experience, learning that love wasn't defined by how long someone stayed, but by how deeply they were cared for while they were here. One crisp afternoon, months after Duke's passing, Lila and Hannah returned to the park where they had shared so many joyful moments. As they strolled along the familiar path by the lake, Lila suddenly stopped and pointed. "Mommy, look!" she exclaimed. Sitting by the water's edge was a small, scruffy dog. His coat was patchy, and he appeared a little rough around the edges, but his eyes sparkled with hope. The dog looked up at them, his tail wagging cautiously. Hannah smiled gently. "Do you think he needs a home?" Lila nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up. "Can we, Mommy? Can we help him, like we helped Duke?" Hannah knelt down and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, sweetie," she said warmly. "I think we can." As they approached the dog, Lila reached out her hand, just as she had done with Duke. The dog sniffed her fingers and, sensing he was safe, pressed his nose against her palm. Lila's face lit up with joy, her heart once again brimming with love. In that moment, she knew that while Duke was no longer with them, the love he had given her would guide her forever. With the sun setting behind them and a new friend by their side, they walked home, their hearts full of hope and love. They knew that the bonds we form with our animals never truly fade. They live on in the cherished memories we hold and the love we continue to share. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We release a new video every day, so stay tuned for more heartwarming stories. Take care, and see you in the next one.